Truckers of Reddit, what is something you have witnessed driving at night that gave you chills? I still remember the top story from this thread from 6 years ago. Many years ago I was on what is called a meet and turn. This is where a driver that is domiciled out of one city will drive a load halfway to its destination, while a driver domiciled out of that destination will drive halfway with a load that is destined for my city. We meet in a parking lot, switch trailers and drive back home. I had been on this run for a few months and found that I always got to the meet point about an hour before the other driver. It was a dark and empty dirt lot at about 3 a.m., so I would stretch out across the seat and take a short nap. One night, about 10 minutes into my nap, I was awoken by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but it carried on for several minutes and got louder as the dog got closer. Soon, it became apparent that the dog was right outside of my truck barking at me. Okay, either this dog is Lassie and is trying to alert me to something, or else he is just a pain in the ass and I will need to throw something at him to scare him off. It is important to note that the barking had been going on for a good 10 minutes at this point. So, I sat up and looked out my window. Standing there, mere inches on the other side of the glass, was a man of about 35. He was a large fellow, and was barking at me. His eyes were crazy and he was frothing at the mouth a little. The scene really held my full attention for a moment. The sheer creepiness of this struck me. Gently, and making an absolute minimum of sudden movements, I reached down and started my truck and slowly pulled away. He chased me, much like you might expect an angry dog to do, barking all the while. Needless to say, it played hell with my power naps from then on. A friend who is a truck driver told me this one. He was driving through the edge of some bushland on his way back to Perth, Western Australia, when he hit a kangaroo. He stopped the truck, grabbed his knife, in case he needed to dispatch it, his flashlight, and got out. He went over to the kangaroo. It needed to be dispatched, as it was alive and in immense pain, but he got this weird feeling that he was being watched. He flashed his light around and saw dozens of pairs of red eyes watching him. The whole mob of kangaroos was just standing there watching him kill one of their mates. Kangaroos have red eye shine. He quickly dispatched the kangaroo, bolted back to his truck, and took off. He said it was the creepiest shit he had ever seen on the road. Where do you want me to start? I'll stick with a story from when I was straight and sober. Coming back from Kununurra, very northern town in Western Australia, to Perth one night. Seen no one else on the road for hours, but every now and then, on a long straight, I could see a set of tail lights in the distance. All of a sudden, there's the tail lights, attached to a trailer that stopped dead in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes and swerved around it, and that's when I realized that the truck, towing 3 trailers, had run off the road into the only large tree for miles. If not for how this ended, I'd laugh my ass off at the irony. I pulled forwards, off the road, and jumped out. My co-driver, who'd been asleep, but got thrown out of the bunk when I slammed on the brakes, was already calling emergency services. As I got to the back of my third trailer, wisps of smoke started from under the cab of the Volvo wrapped around the tree. I raced back, grabbed a fire extinguisher and was running towards the wreck when I heard a groan from the ditch, about 10 meters in front of the wreck. The driver had been thrown clean through the windscreen, and while he was an absolute mess, at least he was alive. The Volvo was, by now, in flames. But that just gave me some light to inspect old mate for injuries. And then I heard the sound that, even now, tears me to the core. A thin, high-pitched squeal, gradually progressing into the most soul-piercing scream I've ever heard. His co-driver had also been asleep in the bunk. And with the truck wrapped around the tree, he was stuck. And I hadn't thought to fight the fire. And now some poor bastard was burning to death, trapped in a steel coffin, while I just collapsed. Impotent and broken. I still drive trucks now. It's my life. It's cost me several relationships and a marriage, but I don't know anything else that I can do. I love the life, I love the freedom, and I always know that I can lose everything in the blink of an eye. But I never again, and never will, drive as a 2-up team. I could never live with killing a workmate because I fucked up. I-25 south of Albuquerque, there's a huge dip, straight down one side of a canyon and up the other. I'm a very safe driver, So I took the downgrade slow and crawled up the other side with my hazards on. Looking in my mirror, I see headlights from another truck at the bottom, then two jets of flame shoot like 20 feet into the air above it. This truck runs past me doing 80 up the slope. I didn't even know it was possible to put nitrous into a semi. I know it ain't legal, but I thought the devil himself was riding up on me. When I was about 12, our family vehicle broke down on the side of the highway. The two adults asked me and my 10-year-old cousin to go walking and find a payphone because one was heavily pregnant and the other was disabled. We walked for about 2 miles when a trucker pulled over and asked what we were doing. We explained the situation, and he said to get in the truck and he would take us to Walmart. He was an older black man with a gray beard and a heavy foreign accent. As we climbed into his truck, he told us we should never ever get in the truck with a strange man because it's extremely dangerous, but we did it anyway and he took us to Walmart and we called somebody to come help us. Any random truck driver could have raped us and killed us easily. But thankfully, this one didn't. Not mine but my grandfather's. One night after completing his water delivery, he stops at a roundabout to let the other car go through, but it doesn't, and soon people hop out with knives and tools and they yell at him to cut the engine and to hop out of the truck. He guns it, smashing their car out of the way, and goes around the roundabout and drives to the nearest police station and tells them what happens. He thinks they were trying to steal the bulldog from his truck cause the only way to get it is to steal it or buy a Mack truck. There's another driver where I work that tells a story about driving through the desert in Arizona back in the 80s with nothing around for miles. When he broke down in the middle of the night, it was an easy fix. His fuel filter was clogged. He drained it a little to free up the fuel and got the truck running. About 15 minutes later, he took off down the highway when he saw a man that was out of breath on the side of the highway that was staring at him as he passed. He said it looked like the guy had been running toward him until he got his truck running and drove away. He said if he had been there a few more minutes, the guy would have been able to walk up on him with his head in the engine bay. He said the look on the guy's face gave him chills, and telling the story you could see it still creeped him out. In the 90s I lived in a logging camp in northern British Columbia. It was a big one made up of trailers and had about 300 people living there, including families. I drove the water truck on weekends when the camp was on days off. When driving on logging roads, you radio your kilometer markings with the name of the road to avoid collisions. Empty on Windfall 10 to say you were 10 clicks on the Windfall road heading away from camp, and loaded on Windfall 10 to say you were coming back. Anyways, being a weekend, I didn't expect anyone to be hanging around except a skeleton crew. I had no idea that there was a kid's birthday party up on the top end of the Windfall road. It's beautiful up there with a clear landing and a pond, so why not? The family hired 2 clowns from a nearby town for the kids. Apparently the clowns wrapped up their show and were heading back to camp, but they were not using the radio. I'm on the road in a big water truck doing 50 kh and they come bombing around a corner doing 50 kh in a fucking clown car and we almost collide. I blasted the horn as this car with a plastic star on its roof goes whipping by with 2 screaming clowns inside, and I could just not figure out what the fuck had just happened. This is a story my dad told me. He was a long-haul trucker for about 15 years, and currently shorter runs in the tri-state area. He and his older brother were tag team truck drivers back in the early 2000s when timings weren't as closely regulated. They drove 2 trucks, and would switch out when their time driving was up, to hit deadlines faster. One night, as they were driving through Arkansas, I believe, my uncle was leading with my dad behind. My father recalls a giant puff of red, much like when you hit a deer in a semi. The pair thought nothing of it until they pulled over for the night. On my uncle's grill was a hand. Naturally they freaked the fuck out and called authorities. The hand was confiscated and it was later discovered to belong to a suicidal man, who had jumped off an overpass and was disintegrated by my uncle's truck. They still made deadline, despite spending the day in jail. They were released when they found the suicide note in the man's house. My father-in-law said he was hauling a truckload of Furbies when they started talking to each other. He said they didn't stop talking the whole time he drove halfway across America.